The heavy porcelain plate shattered against the stainless steel wall. Shards of white china exploded across the kitchen floor like a ceramic grenade. Silence instantly paralyzed the room. 20 chefs in crisp white uniforms froze over their stations. The only sound was the bubbling of stocks and the heavy breathing of one man. Gordon. He stood in the center of the pass with his face flushed a deep, violent crimson. He looked like a mad king surveying his terrified kingdom. I kept my head down. My hands were submerged in scalding hot water and gray soap suds. I scrubbed a burnt pan with a steel wool pad until my fingers bled. I was invisible. To the world. I was just the dishwasher at l'Orangerie, the most exclusive restaurant in Napa Valley. But to Gordon, I was a ghost. I was the woman whose genius built his empire. I was the wife he had discarded like a used napkin once he stole my grandfather's recipe book. Gordon marched toward the trembling sous chef who had dropped the plate. He loomed over the young man. He screamed that the boy was a worthless amateur who did not deserve to breathe the same air as a Michelin-star chef. He threatened to destroy the boy's career in every kitchen from San Francisco to New York. The boy shook with fear and whispered a pathetic apology. He scrubbed harder. The metal of the pan scraped against my skin. I remembered when Gordon used to look at me with that same intensity. Back then, it was love. Or so I thought. Now I knew it was hunger. He was a vampire who had drained me of my talent, my recipes, and my dignity. He had taken my family's legacy, the Blackwood Chronicles of Culinary Secrets, and copyrighted them under his own name. He had used expensive lawyers to force me into a divorce settlement that left me with nothing but debt and a gag order. However, tonight was different. Tonight was the night the devil would choke on his own pride. The kitchen doors swung open. The tuxedoed maitre d' rushed in, with a look of pure panic on his sweaty face. He announced that the guest at table 4 had arrived. The entire kitchen stopped breathing. Table 4. It was him, Julian Vance. Julian Vance was not just a food critic. He was the executioner of the culinary world. A single bad review from him in the New York Times could close a restaurant overnight. A good review could mint a millionaire. He was here to decide if l'Orangerie deserved to keep its coveted 3 stars. Gordon straightened his chef's coat. He smoothed his hair. His arrogance returned instantly. He commanded the kitchen to prepare the signature dish. My signature dish. Gordon called it the velvet venison. He claimed he invented it during a hunting trip in the Scottish Highlands. That was a lie. I created that dish in a tiny apartment in Oakland when we were broke. I spent 6 months perfecting the balance of juniper berries and dark chocolate mole. It was the dish that made him famous. It was the dish that stole my life. Gordon turned his eyes toward the dishwashing station. He sneered at me. He barked at me to pick up the pace because he needed clean pans for the service. He treated me like a stranger. He thought he had won. He thought that by hiring me out of pity as a dishwasher, he was humiliating me one last time. He wanted me to watch him receive the ultimate glory using my stolen art. But Gordon made a fatal calculation. He assumed I was broken. He assumed I was just washing dishes. He did not know that a dishwasher handles everything that goes out and everything that comes back. He did not know that I had access to the mise-en-place preparation area for exactly 5 minutes before the shift started. I looked at the clock on the wall. 7 in the evening. The order for the venison was printing on the ticket machine. The machine chattered like a machine gun. Gordon clapped his hands. He shouted for the line to fire table 4. He demanded perfection. He looked at the sous chef and warned that one mistake would cost them their lives. I pulled a clean plate from the rack. The steam rose around my face. I watched the line cooks begin to sear the meat. The smell of the venison hit me. It was rich and gamey. It smelled like betrayal. Gordon grabbed the pan. He began to spoon the sauce over the meat. He did it with the flair of a magician. He believed he was the master of flavor. He believed his palate was infallible. However, he had forgotten the first rule of chemistry. The smallest change in a formula can turn a cure into a poison, or in this case, a masterpiece into a disaster. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had made a switch. It was tiny. It was invisible. It was indistinguishable to the naked eye. But it was sitting right there in the spice rack. labeled as sumac. It was not sumac. Gordon plated the dish. He wiped the rim with a pristine white cloth. He inspected it under the heat lamp. It looked perfect. It looked like a 3-star meal. He handed it to the waiter with a smug grin. He ordered the waiter to deliver it to Julian Vance with the chef's compliments. The waiter walked out the swinging doors. I watched the plate disappear into the dining room. Gordon turned to the kitchen crew. He boasted that tonight they would make history. He laughed. It was a loud, hollow sound. I looked down at the soapy water. I smiled for the first time in 3 years. Yes, Gordon, we certainly are going to make history, just not the kind you think. The double doors swung shut. The dining room was now a separate world. I turned back to the sink. The scalding water burned my hands. But the memory of my marriage burned hotter. 10 years ago. Gordon was nobody. He was a line cook with charming blue eyes and zero talent. I was the shy girl in the back of the class at the Culinary Institute of America. I had something he lacked. I had the Blackwood Chronicles. It was a leather-bound journal passed down from my great-grandfather who served the French aristocracy. It contained flavor combinations that modern science was just beginning to understand. Gordon seduced me. He made me believe we were partners. We opened our first bistro on a loan from my parents. I cooked. He smiled for the cameras. The critics praised the food. They called it revolutionary. Gordon took the bows. I stayed in the kitchen. I told myself it did not matter because we were a team. Then came the betrayal. It happened 3 years ago. I came home early from the market to find our bedroom empty of his clothes. A process server was waiting on the porch. He handed me divorce papers. Gordon did not just leave. He sued me for full ownership of the restaurant and all intellectual property. He had a team of sharks for lawyers. They argued that because I wrote the recipes while employed by the corporation he owned, the recipes belonged to him. The judge was old and tired. He did not understand the soul of cooking. He ruled in Gordon's favor. Gordon took the restaurant. He took the house. Worst of all, he took the Blackwood Chronicles. He copyrighted my family's heritage under his own brand. He even filed a restraining order to keep me 500 feet away from his kitchen. I was blacklisted. Gordon told every owner in the city that I was unstable. He said I was a drug addict. No one would hire me to boil water. I lost everything. I was sleeping in my car when Gordon called me last month. He offered me a job. He did not offer me a chef position. He offered me the dishwasher role. He laughed on the phone. He said it was an act of charity for his poor, crazy ex-wife. I accepted. He thought I was desperate for the minimum wage. He was wrong. I was desperate for access. I looked up from the sink. Gordon was pacing near the pass. He was sweating through his white tunic. He knew Julian Vance was a shark. Julian did not just eat food. He interrogated it. The kitchen monitor showed a live feed of the dining room. I watched Julian Vance pick up his silver fork. He was a thin man, with glasses that magnified his critical eyes. He inspected the venison. The meat was seared to a perfect medium rare. The dark chocolate mole sauce glistened under the chandelier lights. It looked flawless. Gordon leaned in closer to the monitor. He whispered to his sous chef that they were about to get their 3rd star. He was already spending the money in his head. However, the dish relied on a delicate chemical balance. The richness of the chocolate and the gamey flavor of the deer needed a sharp acid to cut through the fat. That acid came from the sumac spice. It was a red berry powder with a tart, lemony flavor. Or at least, it was supposed to be sumac. I had spent 3 weeks preparing for this night. I did not use poison. I was not a murderer. I was an artist. I had gone to a specialty herbalist in Chinatown. I bought a bag of dried Gymnema sylvestre leaves. It is an herb known as the sugar destroyer. When it touches the tongue, it temporarily blocks the sweet receptors for 30 minutes. I ground the leaves into a fine reddish powder. I mixed it with a little red food coloring to match the sumac. I swapped the jars in the spice rack right before service began. Without sweetness. Chocolate does not taste like chocolate. It tastes like bitter dirt. It tastes like chemical sludge. The mole sauce was 50% dark cocoa. without the sugar reception. That sauce would taste like concentrated earwax mixed with mud. On the screen, Julian Vance cut a piece of the meat. He swirled it generously in the dark sauce. He brought the fork to his lips. Gordon held his breath. The entire kitchen went silent. Even the exhaust fan seemed to quiet down. Julian placed the food in his mouth. He chewed once. He chewed twice. Then, he stopped. His eyes went wide behind his thick glasses. It was not a look of pleasure. It was a look of absolute confusion followed by pure repulsion. He dropped the fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. He reached for his water glass and frantically rinsed his mouth. Gordon's smile vanished. He looked at the monitor in horror. He screamed at the screen. He demanded to know what was happening. Julian Vance stood up. He did not look happy. He looked insulted. He picked up his napkin and threw it onto the table. He marched toward the kitchen doors. Gordon turned pale. He looked around the kitchen wildly. He did not know that his masterpiece had just become a weapon of mass destruction. And I just picked up another dirty pan, dipped it in the water, and waited for the explosion. The double doors crashed against the walls with a violent boom. Julian Vance stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. He held the plate in his trembling hand. The entire kitchen staff froze in terror. Julian slammed the plate onto the stainless steel pass. The sauce splattered onto Gordon's pristine white apron. Julian did not yell. He spoke with a quiet, lethal intensity that was far more terrifying than screaming. He demanded an explanation for the culinary atrocity on his tongue. He accused Gordon of serving him sewage disguised as haute cuisine. He wiped his mouth with a napkin as if he were trying to scrub away a disease. Gordon stammered. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He tried to laugh it off. He insisted there must be a mistake. He grabbed a silver tasting spoon. He plunged it into the sauce on the rejected plate and shoved it into his mouth. I watched from the shadows. I counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. Gordon's eyes bulged. The bitterness hit him like a physical punch. The gymnema herb had stripped away every molecule of sweetness from the chocolate. The sauce tasted like burnt rubber mixed with bile. It was earthy and vile. Gordon gagged. He spat the black liquid onto the pristine white floor. He coughed violently. He looked at the plate as if it were a venomous snake. Julian Vance adjusted his glasses. He declared that l'orangerie was a fraud. He vowed to write a review that would bury this establishment before the morning sun rose. He promised to strip Gordon of every star, every award, and every ounce of respect he had stolen. Then, he turned on his heel and marched out of the kitchen without looking back. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence before an execution. Suddenly, the volcano erupted. Gordon grabbed a heavy copper pot from the counter. He hurled it across the room. It smashed into the tiled wall inches from the sous chef's head. The clang of metal rang in our ears. Gordon screamed like a wounded animal. He kicked the trash can over. Garbage spilled across the floor. He demanded to know who had sabotaged his sauce. He looked around the room with wild, paranoid eyes. He accused the line cooks of treason. He marched up to the trembling sous chef. He grabbed the boy by the collar of his uniform. He shook him violently. He screamed that the boy was fired. He ordered him to get out of his kitchen before he called the police. The boy ran out the back door in tears. The rest of the staff cowered against the prep stations. They had never seen their leader lose control like this. They saw the facade crack. They saw the ugly, incompetent man beneath the celebrity image. I kept scrubbing a large stock pot. The rhythm of the steel wool against the metal was my anchor. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. The first domino had fallen. However, the game was not over. Gordon was not just angry. He was desperate. And a desperate man looks for a scapegoat. Gordon stood panting in the center of the room. His chest heaved. He ran his hands through his hair. He looked at the ruined sauce. Then, he looked at the spice rack. He walked over to the shelf. He picked up the jar labeled sumac. He opened it. He dipped his finger in and tasted the powder. He froze. He knew that taste. It was not sumac. He recognized the distinct, metallic bitterness of the herbal blocker. He knew that only someone with deep knowledge of food chemistry could pull off such a swap. Slowly, Gordon turned around. He ignored the line cooks. He ignored the waiters peeking through the window. His eyes locked onto the dish pit. His eyes locked onto me. A dark realization dawned on his face. He remembered who really created that recipe. He remembered who taught him about flavor profiles 10 years ago. He marched toward me. He stomped through the grease and water on the floor. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He cornered me against the industrial sprayer. He loomed over me. His breath smelled of bitter chocolate and fear. He hissed a question that froze the blood in my veins. He asked if I thought I was clever. He accused me of poisoning his legacy. He raised his hand as if to strike me. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I gripped the heavy spray nozzle in my hand. I looked him straight in the eye. I prepared to deliver the final blow. I prepared to reveal the second trap I had laid for him. The trap that would send him to prison. Not just bankruptcy. Gordon's hand hovered in the air. His face was a mask of purple rage. The veins in his neck bulged like thick cords against his sweaty skin. He looked ready to kill me right there in the dish pit. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I did not beg for mercy. I gripped the steel spray nozzle like a weapon. Gordon lowered his hand slowly. He did not strike me. Instead, he leaned in close. His voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. He hissed that I was pathetic. He boasted that no one would believe a disgruntled dishwasher over a celebrity chef. He reminded me that he had the best lawyers in California. He bragged that he had paid the divorce judge $50,000 to bury my claims 3 years ago. He poked a finger into my chest. He claimed he would do it again. He promised to plant drugs in my car and send me to prison for poisoning his food. I looked him in the eye. I felt a surge of cold triumph. He had just handed me the key to his own cell. I asked him calmly if he truly believed he was untouchable. Gordon laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. He turned to the terrified staff. He shouted that he was the king of this kitchen. He screamed that he stole the Blackwood Chronicles because I was too weak to use them. He admitted it. He roared that talent meant nothing without power. He declared that he built this empire on my recipes, and there was nothing I could do about it. The kitchen was dead silent. The line cooks stared at him with wide eyes. They had just heard their idol confess to fraud, bribery, and theft. However, Gordon did not care about the staff. He thought they were insignificant minions. He turned back to me with a sneer. He told me to get out of his restaurant before he called the security guards to throw me in the alley. I did not move. I simply raised my finger. I pointed over his shoulder toward the ceiling above the pass. Gordon frowned. He followed my finger. He looked up. A small red light was blinking steadily on the black camera mounted on the wall. Gordon froze. His mouth fell open. He recognized that camera. It was the chef's table live feed. It was a high-definition system he had installed last month to stream the kitchen's magic directly to the large screens in the main dining room. He had turned it on 20 minutes ago to show off his plating skills to the VIP guests. He had forgotten to turn it off. I smiled. I informed him that the microphone on that camera was extremely sensitive. Gordon spun around to face the double doors. Through the round porthole windows, he saw the dining room. He saw the horror. Every single guest in the restaurant was standing up. They were staring at the large projection screens on the wall. They had seen everything. They had seen him throw the pot. They had seen him assault his staff. Most importantly, they had heard every word of his confession. Julian Vance was standing right by the kitchen window. He was holding his phone. He was recording the screen. He looked at Gordon with an expression of absolute disgust. Gordon turned back to me. His face went from purple to a ghostly white. His legs began to tremble. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had just confessed to felony bribery and intellectual property theft in front of 50 witnesses and a live audience. Suddenly, the kitchen doors burst open again. This time, it was not a waiter. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. They were followed by a man in a sharp gray suit. I recognized him immediately. It was Agent Miller from the FBI's White-Collar Crimes Division. Gordon stumbled back. He knocked over a stack of pans. The metal crashed loudly on the floor. Agent Miller stepped over the mess. He held up a badge. He announced that they had been investigating Gordon's financial records for 6 months due to an anonymous tip about money laundering. He stated that the confession they just witnessed on the live stream was the final piece of evidence they needed. Gordon looked at me. His eyes were wide with betrayal. He realized then that the sumac switch was just a distraction. It was just the bait to make him lose control. The real trap was the audit I had secretly triggered weeks ago by sending my old accounting logs to the authorities. Agent Miller pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal clicked ominously. He ordered Gordon to place his hands behind his back. Gordon began to beg. He looked at his sous chef for help. The sous chef turned his back and started cleaning his station. He looked at me. I just turned on the sprayer. The water rushed out with a powerful hiss. I started washing the dirty pan he had thrown. The police grabbed Gordon's arms. They dragged him toward the exit. He screamed my name. He screamed that I was a witch. He kicked and struggled as they hauled him past the line of cooks he had abused for years. The doors swung shut behind him. The king of the kitchen was gone. Silence returned to the room. The sous chef looked at me. He looked at the empty spot where Gordon used to stand. He looked at the ruined sauce on the floor. Then, slowly, the sous chef started to clap. One by one, the other cooks joined in. The applause grew louder. It filled the kitchen. It was not the polite applause of a dining room. It was the raw, thunderous applause of liberation. I wiped my hands on my apron. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I had carried for 3 years. But the night was not over yet. There was one person left to deal with. Julian Vance was still standing by the door, and he was walking toward me. The applause died instantly as Julian Vance crossed the threshold of the kitchen. He did not look amused. He looked curious. He stopped directly in front of me. He looked down at my soaked apron and my red prosin. Scrubbed hands. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the spice rack behind me. Then he looked back at my face. He spoke with a voice that was dry and sharp. He stated that he recognized the taste of Gymnema sylvestre. He admitted that it was a brilliant chemical sabotage. However, he pointed out that he was still hungry. He told me that I had successfully destroyed a tyrant, but I had also ruined his dinner. The room went silent. The sous chef looked nervous. He did not know if Julian was going to sue us or scream at us. I wiped my hands on a clean towel. I looked Julian in the eye. I told him that the dinner was not ruined. I told him that he had simply not tasted the real version yet. Julian raised an eyebrow. He challenged me. He asked if a dishwasher knew how to cook a 3-star meal better than the man who was just arrested. I did not answer him with words. I answered with action. I untied the dirty plastic apron. I let it fall to the floor with a heavy slap. It lay there like a shed skin. I walked past the dish pit. I walked past the line cooks who parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked up to the pass. I looked at the sous chef. I ordered him to fire a fresh loin of venison. I told him to bring me the reserve stock from the walk-in cooler. Not the watered-down version Gordon used. The sous chef hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, he shouted, "Yes." Chef with a snap of his heels. The kitchen woke up. The energy changed. It was no longer a place of fear. It was a machine of precision. I took my place at the center station. I felt the heat of the stove. It felt like coming home. I grabbed a copper pan. I added the fats. I added the aromatics. Julian Vance leaned against the counter. He watched every move I made. He watched me temper the chocolate. He watched me reduce the sauce. He watched me balance the acids and the fats without measuring spoons. He saw that I did not cook with my eyes. I cooked with my soul. I reached for the real sumac. I sprinkled the crimson powder into the dark. Glossy sauce. The smell hit the air instantly. It was not bitter. It was complex. It smelled like the forest floor after a rainstorm. It smelled like memory. I plated the dish. I did not use the tweezers or the pretentious foam that Gordon loved. I plated it simply. I let the food speak for itself. I walked around the counter. I placed the plate in front of Julian Vance. I did not wait for a waiter. I served him myself. Julian looked at the plate. He picked up his fork. He cut a piece of the meat. He swept it through the dark mole sauce. He put it in his mouth. He closed his eyes. The room held its breath again. But this time, it was not out of fear. It was out of anticipation. Julian kept his eyes closed for a long moment. A single expression of pure peace crossed his face. He swallowed. He opened his eyes and looked at me. They were not the eyes of a critic anymore. They were the eyes of a believer. He whispered that he had not tasted a balance like that in 20 years. He asked me what my name was. I told him. I said my name is Chloe Blackwood, and this is my grandfather's recipe. Julian nodded slowly. He took out his notebook. He pulled out a fountain pen. He began to write. He did not write a scathing review of a failed restaurant. He wrote furiously. He wrote with passion. He finished writing and tore the page out. He handed it to me. I looked at the paper. It was not a review. It was a phone number. It was the direct line to the owner of the Epicurean Group, the largest restaurant investors in San Francisco. Julian told me that he would call them in the morning. He told me that they were looking for a new executive chef for their flagship location. He said that Gordon's restaurant was dead. But my career was just beginning. He finished his meal in silence. When he was done, he stood up. He shook my hand. He did not shake it like I was a servant. He shook it like I was an equal. Julian left the kitchen. The double doors swung shut behind him. I turned back to the crew. The sous chef was smiling. The line cooks were smiling. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt warm. It felt right. However, there was one piece of business left to settle. I walked into the small office at the back of the kitchen. It was Gordon's office. It smelled of his expensive cologne and his greed. I sat down at his desk. I opened the top drawer. I found what I was looking for. It was a thick, leather-bound book with worn edges, the Blackwood Chronicles. Gordon had kept it hidden in his desk. Like a trophy, I ran my hand over the cover. I felt the texture of the old leather. I opened it to the first page. I saw my grandfather's handwriting. I closed the book and held it to my chest. I had my legacy back. I had my dignity back. The phone on the desk rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was the county jail. I stared at the phone. I knew it was Gordon. He was probably using his one phone call to beg me to drop the charges. He probably wanted to scream at me one last time. I reached out my hand. I hovered over the receiver. I thought about answering. I thought about telling him that he was ruined. I thought about gloating. But then, I pulled my hand back. I did not answer. I let it ring. I had wasted 10 years listening to that man. I was not going to waste another second. I walked out the back door of L'Orangerie into the cool night air of Napa Valley. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of grapevines and wet earth. It did not smell of grease or fear. I listened to the silence. Inside the restaurant, the police were finishing their report. The guests were leaving in shock. But out here, the world was quiet. It was waiting for me. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. The press called it the kitchen nightmare scandal. The video of Gordon's confession went viral instantly. It received 10 million views in 24 hours. People analyzed every frame. They turned his angry face into memes. They turned my calm defiance into a symbol of resistance. The legal system moved faster than a line cook during a dinner rush. Agent Miller found the offshore accounts within a week. Gordon had been laundering money for a cartel using the restaurant's cash flow. He pleaded guilty to fraud and embezzlement to avoid a 20-year sentence. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison. His assets were seized. The bank foreclosed on the restaurant. The expensive stoves, the copper pots, and the crystal glasses were sold at a public auction to pay off his debts. The empire he built on my back collapsed into dust. However, from that dust, something real began to grow. 6 months later, I stood in a different kitchen. It was not a palace like L'Orangerie. It was located in a renovated warehouse in the arts district of San Francisco. The walls were exposed brick. The tables were made of reclaimed wood. There were no white tablecloths. There were no pretentious dress codes. I adjusted the sign on the front door. It read simply Blackwoods. The bell above the door chimed. It was 5 in the afternoon. We were about to open for service. I looked up to see a familiar figure walking through the entrance. Julian Vance did not look like the terrifying executioner anymore. He wore a casual jacket. He did not bring a notebook. He brought a bottle of vintage champagne. He walked up to the open kitchen counter. He placed the bottle on the wood. He smiled with genuine warmth. He congratulated me on the opening. He noted that the reservation list was fully booked for the next 3 months. I thanked him. I told him that his article had changed my life. He shook his head. He corrected me. He insisted that he only shone a light on what was already there. He sat down on a stool. He watched my team prep the line. This time, I was not washing dishes. I was not hiding in the shadows. I was standing at the pass. I was wearing a chef's coat with my name embroidered on the chest. I looked at my staff. They were young. They were eager. Some of them were the same cooks who had worked under Gordon. I had hired them back. But I did not scream at them. I did not throw pots. I taught them. I showed them the secrets of the Blackwood Chronicles. We were not a dictatorship. We were a family. I opened the leather book on the counter. The pages were yellowed with age. But the ideas were timeless. I ran my finger down the recipe for the velvet venison. I realized then why Gordon had failed. Gordon thought a recipe was just a list of ingredients. He thought he could own magic by stealing a piece of paper. He thought power came from fear. Yet, he forgot the most important ingredient. Soul. You can steal a book. You can steal a restaurant. You can even steal a spouse. But you can never steal the fire that burns inside a true artist. Authenticity cannot be forged. It cannot be copied. It can only be lived. I looked at the pot simmering on the stove. The smell of chocolate and sumac filled the air. It was perfect. Julian asked me if I was ready. I picked up a spoon. I tasted the sauce. It was sweet. It was tart. It was balanced. It tasted like freedom. I looked at the packed dining room. I looked at the line of customers waiting outside. I looked at the future. I nodded. I turned to my team. I clapped my hands once. I did not shout. I spoke with a quiet, absolute confidence. I ordered the line to open the doors. The service began. The noise of happy diners filled the room. The clatter of forks against plates was music. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the wife. I was the chef. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged.